Hey there, welcome to the first video of a series of videos I'm going to do all about React hooks. So today we're going to use the state hook and the effect hook, and we're going to build an app that will display the window width and height. So pretty simple, but it should give us a pretty good look at React hooks and some simple ways that we can use React hooks. We're also going to be creating our own custom hook as part of this video as well. So let's jump in here and get started. All right, first of all, we are using the latest release of React, which included hooks. So 16.8 includes hooks. We're okay to jump in straight away. So what we're going to do is pull this out of here, and we're just going to add a paragraph tag here. And we're going to have a property here called size. And it's going to have a width property on it. So we're going to display the width of our window in pixels. And we're going to display the height of our window in pixels as well. All right, well, we don't have size yet, so we'll just make a size variable inside our function. Now, our size variable is going to come from some custom hook. We don't have that yet, so let's go ahead and make a custom hook here. For now, we'll just leave this as an empty bracket. And I'm going to just pull in some styles that I have pre-made for this application. Okay, perfect. So let's talk about this size property. What we want to do is we're going to use the effect hook to detect any changes to the browser width or height. So for this, I'm going to make a new file called useWindowSize. And this is going to be my custom hook here. It is convention to, when we build a custom hook, to use the use keyword, just like the hooks that the React code gives us. I'll use that use word at the beginning. That's so for our linters and for tests that you want to write, you can, that's so that linters can check to make sure that we are using hooks correctly. There's some rules tied with hooks, like you can't use hooks inside conditional statements, something like that. So it will just help you to use hooks correctly if you use the use keyword. Lots of using here. Okay, so first let's import our two hooks. This is not a component, so we don't need to import React here. We're going to use the state hook and the effect hook. So we're going to import those from React. And then we're going to have a function here. We're going to call it useWindowSize. Now, what is this going to do? Well, we know that we want our useWindowSize function to return an object. So let's just at the very bottom here, we're going to return an object. This will get imported into our index file. And then we can call our function, our custom hook right here. And we get the same thing because this is returning just an empty object. But now we're actually importing it and getting it from our custom hook. So let's go ahead and build this object out. So right off the bat, we could just start and say window.innerWidth for our width property, and then same for the height property. But then we wouldn't be detecting any changes, right? So we don't want to do that. Let's create a function, first of all, that is going to get our window size and return an object. Then we have a dynamic function that we can run multiple times in the life of this component. So we'll write a function called getSize. This function is going to return an object with a width property, and it's going to get that property from window.innerWidth. Then it'll have a height property from window.innerHeight. Okay, so when are we going to call this function? Well, we can call it right away, but again, we're going to run into the same problem where it's not going to update when we resize our window. So what we need to do is set up a listener event that's going to listen for a window resize and run some function to handle our window resize. Normally, we would make a class component and we would set up our event listener in the component in mount and then clean up our event listener in component will unmount. But with hooks, we don't need to use those lifecycle hooks. We don't need to use the class component. We have the useEffect hook that's going to take the place of both of those lifecycle components. So we're going to go ahead and bring our useEffect hook into here. Now this hook, the effect hook, takes in a function. So we're going to go ahead and pass in an anonymous arrow function here. And it's well, we'll talk about what it's going to return in just a minute and how we're going to set up the event listener and then clean up our event listener. So first of all, let's set up our event listener. We do that right inside the body of the function. So we're going to add an event listener, and this is the resize event that we're listening for. And we're gonna run a function called handle resize. We don't have this yet, but we'll build it in just a second here. Okay, we know that when we add an event listener, we also need to clean up our event listener. The way we do that in the effect hook is by returning another anonymous function, and inside that anonymous function, we do whatever cleanup we need. So we're going to return a function here, and inside our function, we're going to remove our event listener. And pass in our handle resize function. All right, this really demonstrates well the power of hooks and why the effect hook is just awesome. I love this because in a class component, we would need to write a component did mount function and a component will unmount function, and we would split up this logic that really should live together. These are dealing with the same resize event, and they really should be handled together here. So in the effect hook, we keep the logic together that should stay together. If we had another event listener we wanted to add, we could use a second effect hook right here inside our function. Okay, the next thing we want to do is build our handle resize function. So let's build that right inside here. And we're going to say handle resize. Now we want to run our get size function, but we don't have a place to store this value when we run our get size function right here. So we can run this all day long, but we need to capture the value that's returned. We need to capture this object that's returned out of this function. That's where the state hook comes into play. We're going to use the state hook and create a window size object, and the useState hook will give us the window size object and a way to update our window size object. Now how this looks is when we're going to have something here set equal to our useState function, and we're going to pass in a default value here. Let's actually move this down below get size. Because we're going to pass in get size right here. Now when we invoke the state hook, it's going to return an array with 2 values. So we're going to destructure this array, and the first value is the piece of state that you want to use. So we're going to say window size. And when we pass in this function, it gets called and returns an object. So we could simply pass in this object here as our default state. But no, we don't need to do that because we've got a function that is doing that for us. But that's the value that window size gets when our app component first mounts. So when that component mounts, runs this custom hook, we run this code the first time, it's going to get this object as the default value. Then the second item that gets returned in this array is a function that we can run and pass in a new value for our window size, our piece of state right here for this object. Now the convention is to call this the same thing here, window size, but with set in front of it. So this would be set window size. I don't think this is as hard and fast as a rule as the use keyword to do set and then window size, but this is in a lot of the examples I've seen about hooks so far. All right, so here is our piece of state. Now, if we wanted state, obviously before hooks, we would again need a class component. And we would need to set state on that class component, and we would need to run this .setState to update that state. The state hook now gives us a piece of state here and a way to update that specific piece of state. So since we have a function to update our state, we can invoke that here, pass in get size, and it will update our state based on our new window size. So the last thing we need to do is just return, instead of returning this function invoked down here, we need to return our piece of state. And let's see, there it is. This is so fun. Okay, so let's take a look at exactly what's going on here. Let's work from the bottom up. So we've got this, well, let's start right back here. We know that we are grabbing this size object and rendering the width and the height properties from this object here. So what is this object here? Well, what does this function return when it gets invoked? This function returns window size when it gets invoked. Now, window size is coming from our state hook here. When this is first initialized, we get our first width and height from our browser as the initial size. Then we're using the effect hook to set an event listener on the resize event, the browser resize event. Every time that the browser resizes, we're going to run this handle resize function here. And this handle resize function again uses an item that's returned from our state hook, which is simply a function to update this window size. You can think of this as set state that's specifically for this one piece of state. So every time we resize our browser, we're going to run this callback function, which is handle resize. It's going to update our window size state with whatever value getSize returns, which again is our width and height. So then, after we run set window size is updated, our component re-renders and re-renders the width and the height of our browser. All right, now the last part of this has to do with our effect hook. So whenever our component updates, this effect is going to be called every single time, and we're going to add a new event listener, and we're going to clean up our old event listener on every single update. So that means on every single time we see the pixels changing here, we're recalling this function. We don't really want that. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that this specific effect hook only gets called on when the component mounts and when it unmounts. If you think about the logic that is happening inside here, this logic would only be used inside the component did mount function. And this part here would only be called in component will unmount. We don't really need to run this or this in between either of those lifecycle phases. But this effect hook by default will do exactly that. To stop that from happening, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a second argument to our effect hook function. Now this argument that you pass in here serves the purpose of telling this hook when to rerun. So we can control, by default it'll rerun on every single re-render, but we can control that a little bit more by passing in an array. Now if we wanted to run this function based on some piece of state that updates, we could pass that into here. So we could do window size, but of course that would be, again, that would accomplish the same thing, because every time that window size updates, which is on every single resize event, we would be rerunning this code. If we had passed in something from props, passed in some value here, from here that somehow changed, maybe we used the useState hook here and we were updating a value here, we could pass that value in to our custom hook, and we could watch for changes on that value, and when that value changes, we would rerun this code. Or we can simply leave our array empty to tell our effect hook not to run, only to run when the component is mounting and when the component is unmounting. So now that we have that in place, we are good to go. So there you go. That is a quick look at the state hook and the effect hook. Watch my channel for some more videos coming out very soon on different short examples of how to use React hooks in different ways. Thanks for stopping by.